Hello, software people. Today we are talking about handing off good requirements to offshore software development teams. Let's get into it. Welcome back to App Creative, everybody. My name is Dale Richards, founder and CEO. We are an app development company on the Silicon Slopes of Utah, and we love building software that changes the world. If you want to innovate new app experiences, scale your technology, transform your business, and disrupt the market, start now by subscribing and hitting the bell.
Good times, live in the moment, feel like summertime.
All right, the next assertion is that offshore software teams get product requirements wrong. I think this is a myth. It's a common perception that offshore teams will misunderstand business requirements and build basically crappy products. This means that even with good software quality, they can sometimes build the wrong product, create the wrong feature, or solve the wrong problem. Now, this is pain related to business requirements, and it's caused by three distinct problems. The first is that the requirements themselves are poorly defined. The second is that the requirements rely too much on unspoken, implied context that is shared within one culture, but lost when communicating across cultures. And we'll get into that here in a little bit. Now, the third problem is that the offshore team members don't have the skills needed to understand and interpret requirements. So, where things go horribly wrong is when all three of these happen at the same time, and it's common. So let's take a mature tech company working with their own internal onshore people. Now, normally in a high-functioning company like this, developers don't define requirements or don't interpret them anyway. They consume them. It's not the developer's job to listen to the CEO or the chief product officer or anyone else other than the product owner and or the business analyst. And these people, product owner or business analyst, this is someone whose job it is to understand the needs of the business and write good requirements that the developers can consume. Now, sadly, this role is often left unfilled, neglected, or incomplete. And even with a good product owner or a good business analyst, sometimes the actual business problem is so complex and so convoluted that writing business requirements becomes really, really difficult. And that's with an internal onshore product owner. So what happens is the business leader tells the product owner, we need a product that does this. Now, I'm not saying that's what should happen. I'm just saying that's what often does happen. And that's also kind of a separate topic. What should happen is that the product owner gathers data from the market about which features are needed and is empowered to define the product strategy for the executive team. But that's a different topic. So the business leader tells the product owner, we need this feature or this product. The business leader takes for granted all of the contextual information that she doesn't have to communicate to the product owner because those things are implied. These two already have a shared understanding of what the feature should do, how it should behave, because they've both gotten used to certain experiences that they've already had in other apps or other products. So then what happens is that the product owner turns around and tells the onshore internal developer, here's this feature that we need you to build. Now, maybe that developer also catches on to all the implied contextual information around that feature. That could be great. Maybe that person actually does ask, so did you want it to behave in this way? And then the product owner says, yes. So now the product owner has filled the gaps left by the business leader, and the developer has filled the gaps left by the product owner because they already have a shared cultural context. Now that's two layers of value that are just implied, almost left to chance. Now, take another company that's earlier in its progress. So the scaling SaaS company where they've taken an MVP to market, they need to scale it and build a lot of software on a tight budget. So the founder wakes up one day and says, oh my gosh, we need more developers. Maybe we should go offshore. We can get more developers for less money. And the assumption is that the company's attention is directed directly to the software developers. That founder does not wake up that same morning and before giving any thought to development, that person does not say, what we need is a good BA or a good product owner. Someone who can really own our requirements and our product. So maybe there is kind of a de facto product lead who really is just a smart person who works really hard, and the curse of their own competence condemns them to become the tech lead or the product lead. Now that person does not really have any experience analyzing or writing product requirements, but suddenly they have to because the company has new offshore developers that need instructions. Maybe that person can gather good input from everyone else inside of the business. Maybe those requirements are communicated within a shared context within the business, and a lot of the implied stuff doesn't need to be stated. But then that person hands off requirements to the new offshore developers. So that second layer of cultural context is now gone. That means that the only thing that the developers have to work with is what's written in the requirements document. Now, maybe we've even skipped UX design, which is really bad. And then the developers are already coding stuff that really hasn't been fully defined. It hasn't really been thoroughly thought through. So the developers come back and then they say, here's your feature. And then the customer gets frustrated, right? Because it doesn't satisfy their business needs. Then they conclude, offshoring doesn't work. Now, different cultures will engage in this dynamic very differently. So if you compare the United States, India, and Russia, for example, on the dimension of uncertainty avoidance, you'll see that Americans and Indians are comfortable with uncertainty. Russians are not. So when the American customer works with the Indian team, the Americans think, yeah, it should be pretty clear what we need. I mean, it's just common sense. So here's a few vague requirements and some chicken scratches to build. I'm sure you can figure it out. That's why we hired you, right? You're developers. So now the Indians in turn think, yes, no problem. This is what the client wrote. This is what we're going to build. So they build exactly that. But they build it without all the missing context that the Americans thought didn't need to be said. So then the Americans are upset. And then they say, well, why did you build it this way? Why didn't you ask any clarifying questions? Like, do we have to spell it all out for you? And the answer is yes, you do. Because the shared cultural context is missing. And the Indians have a similar uncertainty tolerance, so they're not bothered by not having enough info. They're ready to jump in. Now, Russians are very different. The Russian score for uncertainty avoidance is very high. So high that the Russian developer will just stop when, they hit a road bump. Sometimes they will communicate that they're blocked or have a question, but sometimes they won't. And then you need to check with them and kind of solicit feedback from them like, hey, how's it going? What's going on? How are you progressing? You're stuck? Why is that? Okay. So you need to check in with them and ask for updates. Now, the Russian doesn't want to get in trouble for messing something up. They don't want to spoil anything. Both of these things have happened to me. So on the Russian side, I've had Russian team members tell me, I only got so far, but I didn't want to spoil it, so I stopped. Very common. I've had teams where tickets just piled up in a kind of a needs information column, on our Kanban board, and it's kind of like this graveyard where like stuff that wasn't clear just goes to die. Hey, we're blocked on these. We don't have enough info. Can you help? We need to coach developers into saying these things like, hey, we need more information about these tickets. Okay, now on the Indian side, early on in my career, I was a brand new member of the PMO in my company. That's a project management office. And I was assigned this pretty intense project. And everyone just kind of assumed that I had these business requirements under control. And the worst part was that I also assumed that I had the business requirements under control. I thought, I'm pretty talented. I'm going to write these requirements and there will be no ambiguity because I'm the one that's writing them. No misunderstandings. Basically, I'm going to knock these business requirements out of the park. And yes, I did have a list of features that we wanted, so I felt pretty confident until one morning when we had a demo of a particular feature and it had been programmed so differently from what I had assumed was just common sense. So, I was pretty upset. I called the lead developer and I asked him, why did you guys build this feature like this? And I even kind of said, the requirement is right here. It's right here in the requirements document. It's as clear as crystal. He then proceeded to explain to me all of the things that were not in fact clear about my requirement, singular. And he ended by saying, so I think this requirement is actually very vague. And you know what? He was right. Now that was a very poignant lesson to learn that day. So the Indian will build your bad requirements and the Russian will not build your bad requirements on your project and it'll just stall. That's what happens when the requirements are bad, when cultural context is assumed, and developers don't have the skill set to interpret vague requirements. It's not their job. It's the product owner's job. The solution is not to avoid offshoring. The solution is to mature your ability to write business requirements. That means either getting someone who's an experienced analyst or cultivating new skills in your de facto product lead. So we have to solve for good product requirements if we're going to make offshoring work.
She had the back for good times, living